What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Kind of slow on the New York Giants front right now after the draft. I think we're all waiting to hear the news about James Bradberry and where he is going to end up, whether it'll be back with the New York Giants or somewhere else. Schoen, of course, went on WFAN, I think 2 or 3 days ago, said it would be resolved by the end of the week. I don't know what his definition of the end of the week is. A lot of people thought that may be Friday, but as of now, that has still not been resolved. It sounded, when you listen to the interview, at least to me, more than likely that James Bradberry will not be back. But in this video, I kind of wanted to recap the New York Giants roster as of now and kind of talk about some of the strengths and the weaknesses after both free agency and the draft. And of course, there's still some minor additions that the Giants could make. Bradberry could potentially be back on this roster, but I'm going to assume, based off the vibe that I've gotten from Joe Judge and the things that we've heard, that more than likely he will not be back with this team. And I kind of wanted to analyze the roster right now and talk about some of the strengths and the weaknesses of the New York Giants football team coming out of the draft. And the Giants certainly improved the team, specifically in the first round. They got two huge difference makers to really help this team, right? Obviously, on both the offensive line and with the pass rush. Two of the biggest weaknesses that this Giants team has had for the last 10 years. We have not had a dominant pass rusher since the early days of Jason Pierre-Paul, and the Giants' offensive line has been abysmal. Now, suddenly, you look at it like you have two premier tackles for the future for the next 8, 9, 10 years for the New York Giants. But, of course, that's all projections. We need to see how they play on the football field. But let's dive into the roster. Let's go position by position. And of course, I'm going to start with the most important position on a football team. That, of course, is going to be the quarterback. And overall, as a unit, I think the Giants have had a massive upgrade. Not necessarily because of the starter. Of course, the same starter is back. I personally think Jones should be better this year. Doesn't mean he's going to be great. I hope he will be. But I think he'll be better with the additions they've made. The most important addition being what we feel, at least as Giants fans, should be a much improved offensive scheme with the departure of Jason Garrett. But more importantly, you have to hope that some of these weapons stay healthy this year, something they were not able to do last year. I also think Saquon Barkley, another year removed from the injury, should be better. And the most important upgrade from a personnel standpoint is going from Nate Solder to Evan Neal. So that should only help Daniel Jones at the quarterback spot. But why this unit is so improved is because of how better our backup quarterback has become. Tyrod Taylor is a massive upgrade over Mike Glennon. I think we all saw enough of Mike Glennon over last season. In addition to that, Jake Fromm wasn't any better. As a matter of fact, as crazy as it sounds, he may have been worse. Taylor, of course, will bring some stability. He's going to be, I think, 33 years old in season next year, and he's a proven commodity, at least as a fringe starter to backup quarterback. So I think that's a massive upgrade and something the Giants needed to do, especially when you factor in Daniel Jones' injury history. But Shane has come out and said, make no mistakes about it. Taylor knew when he took the job, it was to be the backup. Daniel Jones will be the starter for this football team. That is what I expect to be the case, but they definitely have some insurance that if Jones does go down, at least Tyrod Taylor could keep this team in football games this year. Next up is the running back spot, and, obviously, I think this is a pretty thin position, especially being that the New York Giants did not address this in the draft, but we'll talk about some of the options, of course, behind Saquon Barkley. As I said earlier, I expect Barkley this year for the Giants to look a lot better. I think the new offensive scheme is going to utilize him more properly. I think he'll be used more in the passing game. I think they're going to look to get him out in space, create higher percentage opportunities for Daniel Jones in the passing game, and I think they'll use Barkley to the best of his capabilities. More importantly, I do think Barkley, another year removed from that injury, like I said earlier, should have more confidence, and I think he will be a better player for the Giants this year. After that, it is incredibly thin at the running back position. You have Matt Breida. Breida is a guy that could spell Barkley from time to time, but he's not going to be a guy that gets a ton of carries. He's decent in the pass game as well, and he's a decent, third option, I think, out of the backfield. I don't know if he's a great number 2 option. After that, there's no guarantees as to who's going to make this football team at the running back spot. Of course, you have Brightwell from last season, who a lot of people said Joe Judge brought in almost exclusively for special teams purposes, and I think there's a good chance he'll make the team because of that, because he is a special teams ace. You also have Antonio Williams, who we brought over from the Buffalo Bills. Kind of brought him over as soon as Joe Schoen got the job, so it's possible he can make the team. In addition to that, you have Corbin, the undrafted free agent from Florida State, who I think actually stands a pretty good chance to make this Giants football team. But as of now, I would say this is a pretty thin group, but at the same time, I do think Barkley will be much improved this season. The wide receiver group is actually a pretty deep group if they could stay on the field, and we don't have a number one option, at least at this point in time. Maybe Golladay will evolve into what we thought he could be last year. It'll be interesting to see how they feel he fits the new scheme, however. I actually thought he fit Jason Garrett's scheme relatively well, being that he was kind of a 50-50 specialist, but they didn't use him to the best of his capabilities. Didn't get a lot of targets last year with the New York Giants and finished the year with 0 touchdowns. After Golladay, of course, you have Kadarius Toney going into his second year. I'm very intrigued and interested to see how the New York Giants utilize him in this scheme. I think they could get really creative with him at that position. Then you have Sterling Shepard, of course, coming off the injury. There's no telling when he's going to be 100% and ready to go. May not be ready by the start of the season. Wendell Robinson, the newly acquired rookie, who, of course, the New York Giants took in the second round, I believe at number 42 overall, has a similar skill set to that of Toney. And again, I think there'll be a lot of pre-snap motion with both of these players, and they'll look to get both involved. A lot of bubble screens for Robinson if you look at the tape, and is capable of playing, mainly in the slot due to his height at 5'8". After that, you have Darius Slayton. There's rumors that he could be traded. I currently view him as actually the 5th wide receiver option when Sterling Shepard is completely healthy, and there's a good chance he could be traded or even potentially cut, especially if they plan to, keep Bradbury. You would think that he'd be one of the most likely guys they could cut/trade to save $2.5 million, but as of now, he's still on the team. And then there's a lot of options at the 6 and 7 wide receiver spot if they decide to go with 7, if they even decide to go with 6. But I would think Richie James and CJ Board both stand a very good chance to come back with the Giants. Board, much like Brightwell, due to his special teams prowess, and the same could probably be said for Richie James, who I think the Giants brought in here mainly due to the fact that he's a good return specialist, and I expect him to probably be the punt returner for the Giants in 2022. So it's a pretty deep wide receiver class. A lot of injury-prone players, however, right? You look at Toney, you look at Golladay, you look at Sterling Shepard, even Wendell Robinson, I believe, to my knowledge, had some injury problems well in college. So it is a relatively deep group. It is kind of, an injury play group as well. We have to hope that these guys could stay relatively healthy in 2023. Next position group is the tight end spot. I got Ricky Seals-Jones here. I hope and pray that the number one option is, Daniel Bellinger, who the Giants actually drafted in the 4th round of this year's draft. I think he's a complete tight end. Ricky Seals-Jones is more of a pass catcher. He's also been plagued with injuries throughout his career. Giants signed him on a 1-year deal. Again, a pretty thin position group. Giants also brought in Jordan Akins, who should at least compete to make this football team. Had a couple of decent years with the Houston Texans. And Austin Allen is a name to keep your eyes on, an undrafted free agent who's 6'8", more of a blocking specialist. It'll be interesting to see how many tight ends they go with. They may even only go with 2. I think they'll probably go with 3, but obviously, from what we read, don't expect them to use a lot of 2 tight end sets in this new offense. So I don't think they'll go with more than 3. If I had to guess right now, the favorites are Bellinger, Seals-Jones, and Akins, but Austin Allen probably has a good opportunity to potentially crack this roster. Then we're going to go to the offensive line, which I'm really excited about, which is funny to say, because last year I was scared to death of the offensive line. And don't get it twisted. I do think this offensive line will struggle, especially at the beginning of the season, due to the fact that there's no familiarity. Obviously, Bobby Johnson, the new offensive line coach coming in. So it'll be, I think the 4th offensive line coach that Andrew Thomas has had to deal with since he's taken over. Of course, he had Mark Colombo and DeGuglielmo in his first year. Last year, they had Rob Sale. Now he's on his 4th offensive line coach in 3 years, and he's not going to have any familiarity with any of the members on this offensive line. It's kind of a makeshift offensive line. The Giants went out there and signed a ton of guards, so I do expect a slow start for the line, but I do think there's a lot more talent here, and there's a lot of room for hope and growth for the future. Yeah, obviously, the man pictured here, Andrew Thomas, will be back as the starting left tackle. After that, you got Mark Lewinsky, who is at least a serviceable guard that hopefully can man the fort for the Giants for a couple of years with this football team. John Feliciano, I view him as a 1-year stopgap option in the middle, but again, has familiarity at least with Bobby Johnson playing with him in Buffalo. We also brought in Max Garcia, who's a veteran as of now. I'd probably have him penciled in to be the starter at guard, but that could easily change. And then, of course, Evan Neal, the 7th overall selection, who will be starting on the right side. Those 5 guys, I think, are guaranteed a roster spot. In addition to that, I think the 2 rookies that we drafted in both the 3rd and 5th round out of North Carolina, Josh Azudu and Marcus McKeithen, are probably guaranteed a spot as well. So that gives you 7 of, I would think, a potential 9 linemen to make this team. Then you got Matt Gano, who the Giants brought over from the, I believe, the Atlanta Falcons, who is a swing tackle, and I guess the battle there will be between him and Parrott, but Parrott's not going to start the season. Giants will probably stick him on the pup, and Parrott may never play another game as a New York Giants football player. Depends on how the new regime feels about him. You also have Shane Lemieux and Jamil Douglas, a free agent that the Giants brought in. I think will be competing for that final guard spot. At least that's the way I look at it right now. Wouldn't be shocked if Shane Lemieux ultimately gets cut from this football team, but we'll have to wait and see. Also, Nick Gates, who's coming off the injury, we'll have to wait and see how the Giants view him and whether or not he's worth that $3 million salary coming off the injuries that he sustained. The special teams unit, before we get into the defense, is pretty cut and dry as of now. Graham Gano's the kicker. We have the same long snapper that we've had in Casey Kreider, and the punter, at least as of now, is Jamie Gillen. I think the Giants will at least bring in some competition there, and we'll have to wait and see. Of course, they cut Riley Dixon, who's eating up a lot of salary, who's been a mediocre punter at best the last couple of years for the Giants. Now we're going to turn to the defensive line. The Giants bring back a lot of familiar faces there. Of course, they signed an extension with Leonard Williams last year. Had a good year. Didn't quite meet the year before. I do think he'll benefit from the improved pass rush at the outside linebacker spot, which we'll get to in a second. But I do think this could be a pretty strong overall unit. Other than Leonard Williams, you have Dexter Lawrence, who, of course, the Giants signed on the 5th-year option. Is a good player. It'll be interesting to see if they use him a little bit more in the interior this year. And the other guarantee, at least for me on that defensive line, is DJ Davidson. I'm not saying he's going to be a starter, but you have to figure, due to the fact he was a 5th-round pick, he's pretty much a lock to crack that line. I think then you have 2 more spots more than likely available, and you have Justin Ellis, you have Jihad Ward, a couple of free agent acquisitions that the Giants brought in. In addition to that, you have Chris Hinton and Tyrone Truesdale of Florida, both of whom were undrafted free agents, who the Giants probably at least see some potential in that could potentially crack this roster on the defensive line. We're not really deep at that spot, but we have a couple of difference makers, obviously, with Dex and Leonard Williams. Now we're going to turn our attention to the outside linebacker spot, the edge rusher spot for the Giants football team. And obviously the man in the picture there is the guy most Giant fans are going to be excited about, Kayvon Thibodeaux, the 5th overall selection out of Oregon. At least in my opinion, probably has the highest ceiling, or at least close to the highest ceiling of any edge rusher in this year's draft class. He slipped a bit to the Giants. The Giants snagged him at 5th, and I think he's most similar to Osi Umenyiora. I've talked about that the last couple of weeks. When I see his first step, he's also very strong, and I think he will develop more in terms of pass rush moves and things of that nature with the New York Giants. So really excited to see him out on the football field. I think he'll probably be the #1 sold jersey this year for the Giants. In addition to that, at this spot, you have Azeez Ojulari, who, of course, last year had a great rookie season, set the sack record. I think he had 8.5 sacks out of Georgia, and his job should only get easier with the addition of Thibodeaux. After that, you have Quincy Roche, who was a good free agent pickup last year for the Giants after he was cut by the Pittsburgh Steelers after being drafted, I think, in the 5th or 6th round. Giants snagged him as he did not make the team out of training camp and was a pretty productive player when given the opportunity. You also have Ellerson Smith, Carter Coughlin, and O'Shane Zimenez. If I had to guess, Smith, Coughlin, and Zimenez probably competing for 2 spots at the back end at that outside linebacker spot. But of course, the 2 big difference makers there are going to be Kayvon Thibodeaux and Azeez Ojulari. Now we're going to turn our attention to the middle linebacker group, which of course is headed by Blake Martinez. We don't know how healthy Blake is and how good he's going to be coming off the injury, but you have to figure right now he's the only guy that you could really count on at that spot to at least give you solid play at the NFL level. We have a lot of unproven players outside of Blake, who was very good with the New York Giants in 2020 before suffering that injury in 2021, but expect him to be in the starting lineup when he is ready to go. You also have Tate Crowder, who I expect to make this team, started for the Giants last year, and he was a difference maker at times, but obviously struggles in coverage. You also have the 2 rookies who the Giants brought in, who I think both will make this team. Micah McFadden out of Indiana, who I think can be used as a situational pass rusher up the middle, and you will, of course, have Darian Beavers, who I think will be a good special teams contributor and potentially could get an opportunity to see some time in the starting lineup with the Giants throughout the season. The secondary, this to me is going to be the Achilles heel to this defense if we lose James Bradberry. And I'm not saying that they may not exceed expectations. I'm not saying they may not have enough talent there to get by with what we hope is a really good pass rush. But even if you feel Adoree Jackson and Aaron Robinson, who at least as of now I project to be the starter, could get the job done, they're really thin. Adoree Jackson goes down with an injury. Suddenly you have a guy that you drafted to be a slot corner and Aaron Robinson starting at cornerback 1, and you have Flott, who is, at this point, at least in my opinion, a project on the other side. So if there is one player, if we do in fact lose James Bradberry, that the New York Giants cannot afford to lose due to injury, it is a guy who has had injury problems in the past, and that is Adoree Jackson. Adoree Jackson's a good corner. I don't know if I'm comfortable saying that he's our number 1. I'd probably prefer at least a guy that's equal or at least slightly better to him at the cornerback 1 spot. But that's who we're going to roll with if, in fact, we do cut James Bradberry. And on the other side, it looks as if, as of now, the favorite is Aaron Robinson. Robinson does have good athletic ability, and maybe the Giants do feel like he could fill in that void, but make no mistake about it, this will be, at least in my opinion, the weakness of this New York Giants defense, which is not the best of news, being that in a wink scheme, you have to be able to cover as best as you can. Obviously, I mentioned Cordell Flott. We'll see if he gets an opportunity. The 81st overall selection. You also have Darius Williams and Darnay Holmes, who have been on the teams previously. I'm not going to say that they're locks to make this roster, though. I think Adoree Jackson, Aaron Robinson, and Cordell Flott are. Also locks, I would say Julian Love, Xavier McKinney, and Dane Belton. Julian Love has the potential to also play on the outside. I remember the Cowboys game in which he played the cornerback spot, but we're also really thin at that safety spot right now, and if they don't feel Dane Belton is ready to start, I obviously expect Julian Love to be starting at the other safety spot opposite Xavier McKinney, who is one of the, guys that we could depend on in this defense. Last year had a fabulous year for the Giants in his second season, and hopefully will be a long-term answer at that position. Two other options that I could see making the team in terms of undrafted free agents would be Yusuf Corker, who is had a 5th-round grade, went undrafted. The New York Giants picked him up, so I think he has a legitimate shot to make this team. Also, Trenton Thompson, who is known to be a really good special teamer while at San Diego State, did have two block punts and is a very versatile player in the secondary. So I think both of those guys potentially could make a difference at the safety position. So that's the Giants' overall roster. Right now, if you ask me, I think our biggest weakness is that cornerback spot. I also think the offensive line will be dramatically improved. We'll probably get off to a bit of a slow start, being that there's no familiarity there at all. I think it'll take 3, 4, 5 weeks for them to kind of build some chemistry, but it's definitely trending in the right direction. Really excited about the pass rush. Quarterback spot will be the biggest question mark that hopefully we get an answer to by year's end, but I can't wait to see the New York Giants take off in September. I just wanted to give you guys my overall opinion of the overall roster after the draft. This is not going to be the final roster. There will be, I'm sure, a couple of additions once players get cut from teams, and maybe James Bradberry will be back. But if he's not, we will be thin in the secondary. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.